Jeffrey, here we are talking about calling. I want to talk to you a little bit about a movie that I watched recently, a documentary called 180 Degrees South. And it's about a guy who's currently a climber, surfer, that kind of real outdoorsy
man's
guy.
Man.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was chasing kind of the history of two of the real pioneers, Yvon Chouinard and Doug Tompkins, who were, among other things, the first to make a successful ascent of the face of El Capitan in Yosemite. Yes. And Chouinard's gone on to develop the Patagonia Sportswear Company and a lot of mountain climbing gear and that kind of thing. And Doug Tompkins has pursued a dream to save a significant portion of Patagonia, and over time, through various purchases and trust work and things like that, they had acquired 2 million acres of land in Patagonia, and with the intent of kind of continually turning it over to the government as a national park. A lot of other countries don't necessarily have a national park program going on, and there are significant parts of the world that it's great that we're saving those because they're so gorgeous. And so you would definitely say, okay, these are men who have pursued a calling over 40 years. They've found something to really do that has value and even lasting value, because this would be passed on to the future generations of Chile and other people who come to visit Patagonia. And yet there's this really poignant point late in the film where these younger men are going to go scale this particular mountain that Doug Tompkins had been the only one ever to reach the peak of. And Chouinard decided to go with him. He's 68 now. He says, I'm going to do this. And there was this question posed to him as, why would you do this? And he said, I don't know. I think I'm trying to save my soul. And I thought, my goodness, here is someone who definitely has had what the world would call, in our kind of generic definition of the word, a calling. I'm out there doing my thing and doing it well and doing it with purpose and maybe lasting impact.
And integrity.
And yet, at the very end, he says, I'm trying to save my soul. He was looking for some other thing yet. And so it begs the question, what is the qualitative difference between that kind of generic definition of calling, everybody's got their calling, and the kind of calling that we're talking about that doesn't just last unto the next generation, but has actually eternal, transcendent import. Tell me about that.
Well, I think in its very essence, there is no caller. I mean, when you talk about calling with no caller, who determines calling? You talk about just chance. You talk about chaos theory and how this just evolved to make this, this guy comes up and he solves a problem. We really look at, in the end, it's kind of all vanity. And I think that's where, as we look back at Ecclesiastes, that's where the writer of Ecclesiastes in this wisdom book really helps us. He says, I've seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after wind. In other words, you never really catch it. So when you're talking about transcendence and you have a caller, then you have a caller with a purpose. And then when you talk about an eternal caller, you talk about transcendence. You have something that lasts beyond your life, not merely legacy, which you leave a building or a stadium or something that's named after you, because if you cease to exist, in the end, it's kind of almost a feeling of, well, who cares?
That's right.
You say, well, that's just selfish, and you Christians always suggest that you guys always think you're so selfish and you don't think beyond you. Well, I do want to think beyond me in a general sense, but without a caller and without transcendence, it's almost, who cares?
Yeah.
And I've had this experience. I'll never forget Ben Crane, who is a very close friend of our ministry, and he and Heather are good friends of ours personally. Have the highest respect for Ben. Ben won the San Diego Open, and it was a beautiful tournament and big celebration. We always get a great turnout, and finished the 18th at Torrey Pines, and they had all the interviews and all the 2, 3, 4 hours into the evening and all the trophy presentations and all the pictures and everything. And he was walking out. It was late. It was dark, finding their courtesy car with his caddy. And he said, in his own words, he got to his door and he opened up his door and he realized and he thought, is this all there is? Now that was kind of an ultimate place in his own calling from just a secular perspective. And I was thinking from a secular perspective at that moment in terms of, from a worldly perspective, it's already gone. The interviewers have already left. They're already thinking about traveling to the next site to interview the next winner. And it's already over. Who remembers? Who remembers who won the Super Bowl 3 years ago, unless it was your town? Who remembers who climbed that mountain a generation ago? I'm always fascinated with just 100 years ago, and you see the life of these various people accomplishing great and magnificent things, and yet they're gone. And it's kind of like, so what? If they were just chemicals and chaos, who cares? It's just like it doesn't really matter unless there's a caller. And therein lies the qualitative difference between vanity and chasing and rivalry and trying to get a name for ourselves or achieve success, whatever that means, and actually then fulfilling the reason that you were put on the planet, if in fact there's a reason you're on the planet. And our argument is there is. First, your identity in Christ, and then a response to the caller. Those two things set the stage for something radically different, both in the hearts of those who are striving. So you don't come to the end of your calling, and you don't come to the end of your life and say, well, what was it all worth? Were the sacrifices worth it? Nobody's going to remember this a generation from now. Versus the guy that gets to the end of his life, recognizes he's been in response to the caller, and all that 6-foot hole in the ground is going to do is be an entree into the next life of hopefully a voice that says, well done, good and faithful servant. I called you and you responded.
Yeah, good. Well, that's the kind of calling I would certainly love to answer in my life.
Certainly. And in my view, and I think the writer of Ecclesiastes, the only call worth pursuing would be your caller. Not just your dreams, your fantasy, your desire to succeed, but just the voice of your Creator.